What is the tragedy of open access? The tragedy of open access occurs when you have an unregulated open access resource. Unregulated open access creates a problem because no single individual has a direct incentive to conserve the resource, and so the resource often ends up being overused. Think of a field of grass, ideal for grazing. A shepherd finds the field and starts to graze his sheep there. Soon enough, the field has even more shepherds. Each shepherd continues to bring his sheep to the field, and they begin to find that if they bring more sheep, they can make more profit from their herd. So they begin to increase their number of sheep. Eventually, however, the point's reached where there's no longer an optimal amount of grass in the field for each sheep to eat. So each sheep gets a little bit less healthy for each additional sheep added. However, each individual shepherd still has a direct incentive to increase the amount of sheep they allow to graze, because while each shepherd's own sheep might be a little bit less healthy, this cost is spread out among all the sheep in the field. So the shepherd will get all the benefits from the new sheep while the costs are spread out amongst all the people using the field. Each shepherd knows this, and so every individual has a direct incentive to graze more sheep and overuse the resource. Eventually, the resource will be depleted and the shepherds will need to find a new field. This result is suboptimal because if there were regulation on the field, or if the shepherds found a way to cooperate, then a cooperative sustainable equilibrium could be reached where there may be a few less sheep initially, but the future benefits of the field will persist. The tragedy of open access is dubbed a tragedy because there's actually a cooperative equilibrium that is attainable, but each individual has a dominant strategy to deplete the resource instead of conserving. This can be illustrated in a classic game matrix using two shepherds deciding how many sheep to graze in a field. Now imagine each shepherd has two options, to conserve or to overuse the field. Where conserving the field means operating the field at a sustainable level, meaning less sheep now, but a sustainable yield from the field over time, and overusing the field means getting the most out of it now and depleting the resource. If both shepherds conserve the field, let's say their payoff is 3. If both overuse the field, then their payoff is 2. If one shepherd overuses the field and the other one conserves the field, then the shepherd who overused the resource receives a payoff of 4, and the shepherd who conserved receives a payoff of 1. Using these numbers, let's analyze the following game matrix. If shepherd 1 chooses to conserve the field, shepherd 2 can either conserve and receive a payoff of 3, or overuse the field and receive a payoff of 4. Knowing this, he will choose to overuse the field. However, if shepherd 1 chooses to overuse the field, shepherd 2 can either conserve and receive a payoff of 1, or overuse the field and receive a payoff of 2. So we can see here that regardless of what shepherd 1 does, shepherd 2 has a dominant strategy to overuse the field, because he'll always receive a higher payoff regardless of what shepherd 1 does for overusing the field. And since this game matrix is symmetrical, we can safely say that both shepherds have a dominant strategy to overuse the field. So we've reached an equilibrium where each shepherd receives a payoff of 2, and we must also factor in the knowledge that the field will be depleted after a certain period of time. This is a wholly suboptimal result, considering that if both farmers conserved, they could receive payoffs of 3 and sustain the field for future payoffs as well. Now, while the example with the shepherds might not be pertinent to everyday life today, there are still many real-world examples of the tragedy of open access in our world. Have you ever been stuck sitting in traffic late for work, or have you gotten stuck behind a large group of people walking way too slowly while you're trying to get to class on time? If you've answered yes to either of these questions, then you too have fallen victim to the tragedy of open access. Imagine yourself driving on a highway. At first there are a few other cars on the road. Everybody's able to drive at reasonable speeds, and nobody interferes with each other. However, as we add more and more cars to the road begins to lose its efficiency, and eventually it loses its efficiency altogether, and a traffic jam emerges. This is the tragedy of open access, and it happens in many cities all over the world during rush hour today. So how do we remedy these situations in life where the tragedy of open access exists? The easy solution would be to impose regulations or access fees on commonly used resources so as to avoid overuse and congestion. Regulations don't always have to be monetary, though. There are creative solutions to some problems like traffic congestion. For instance, road space rationing strategies can be used to equitably reduce the number of cars on the road while still maintaining the free aspect of the roads. Road space rationing includes measures such as only allowing cars with certain license plate numbers to drive on certain days. To put this in perspective, these very road space rationing techniques are being used today in Athens to reduce traffic congestion during rush hour by about 20%. In many cities, including Athens, Bogota, Mexico City, Beijing, Italy, and Milan, just to name a few, these measures are already being used to curtail emissions from cars and reduce street congestion. By imposing creative restrictions and regulations on our open access resources, we can fundamentally alter the framework of the game matrix to allow the cooperative equilibrium to be a feasible Nash equilibria, and therefore an attainable reality.